No mic. Got no mic. How about a mic now? Mic, 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 mic check. Mic check, mic check. 1, 2. Okay, that's not. Mic check. 1, 2. Mic check. All right, there it goes. Well, I had people waiting, and I don't know if I went on there. Hey, what's up, Frank? Did I do that right, fellas? There was 4 people, and now I only see 1. I don't know if I did that right. All right, there we go. Hey, what's up, Rich? What's up, Frank? Were you guys waiting? Did you have to come from the? Did you have to go away from the waiting room? I don't know if I did this right. It showed 4 guys waiting, and now there's only 1 there. I'm not sure if that's right. All right. Well, anyway, been talking about aquatic weed control a lot. There's a lot of misinformation around aquatic weed control, always has been. I would say the biggest misunderstanding is people think the more weeds, the better. They don't understand there can be too many, and they don't understand how weeds can change the fish population balance. They also don't understand where a real big misconception lies is how do I say it? They get a competing fish problem. They get another fish into the pond, and that's what causes the problems with the fish population. But they don't realize that. They think it's something to do about the weed control. And most of the time, through most of my career, when guys would be complaining about the weed control program disrupting or somehow impacting the fishery in a bad way or whatever. It could be something as simple as like some years, like the pond just doesn't fish well. Weird weather, weird fish behavior, and it just everybody, myself included, just didn't have a great year fishing at the lake. And then you go to the homeowner association meeting or you meet with the client, and it's automatically assumed that it was the weed control that caused the problem with the fishing, which it wasn't. If you, I've managed ponds for too long. I have had ponds with grass carp that didn't have any weeds that would exhibit the same behavior on the same year, right? They weren't good. Maybe a local pond close by, it didn't fish very well either, and it didn't have any weed issues. It didn't have any weed treatments, and behaved the same way. And you try to explain that to guys, and they don't want to hear it. They've come to that conclusion. To them, that's logical. To me, it's not logical. I, just through experience, 30 years of experience. Yeah, Frank, did when you were waiting, did you have to like come out of it and come to a different one, or did this one just kind of come right on for you? That's what I was wondering. I don't know if I did this exactly right, but that's okay. Um, like one example, I can remember there was a lake. It was a new lake, and well, it actually wasn't new. It was a refurbished. It had a dam problem, and they had to completely let the lake drain down and dig the dam out, dig the old pipe out, and correct that. So it was basically like starting. Oh, hold on. Okay, cool. Um, there's two people there. Cool. Anyway, so the lake was drained to correct the dam because the dam had failed. It had run its life, 50, 60 years old or whatever, and the old corrugated pipe had rusted and it just had to be replaced. And we put the fish in, stocked it exactly the same way I did Sugar Hill Outdoors. It was bigger, but exact same principle. We had feeders going, we had bluegill, we had all that. Um, and same thing with Sugar Hill. There's a feeder stream coming into the lake. Well, Sugar Hill actually has kind of a buffer for that. There's a catfish pond above Sugar Hill that the water comes into there and then it comes out the back of that pond and down into Sugar Hill, and that kind of creates a barrier, so to speak. Any fish that come down that stream end up in that upper pond. Obama won. Wow, that was a good game, man. I was watching that. So anyway, fast forward 10 years because I managed that pond a long time. Lake, it was pretty close to the size of a lake, and that stream coming into that pond didn't have a catch, anything to catch any kind of fish that would come in, and crappie came in and green sunfish came in and red breast sunfish came in, and that changed the dynamic of the forage base, right? So for 10 years, or probably about 6 years really, because I started noticing the crappie and the other fish about year six in the electrofishing surveys, and I was like, oh well, here we go. So as the crappie and green sunfish population grew, the relative weights of my bass went down. I started out lake with new lake effect. I got great growth, just like Sugar Hill Outdoors. Everything was fine, and you could literally see it. You could see as the population went up. Um, I'll call them trash fish. Crappie, green sunfish, red breast. As those fish species increased, you saw the weights of the bass decrease, but you also saw the numbers per acre decrease because you're losing fry to green sunfish and crappie. So, and you're also losing forage in the form of like good bluegill forage is gone. Well, not gone, but it wasn't perfect. It started out perfect and then it became not perfect. And the further and further away it gets from not perfect, the worse and worse and worse your bass population becomes. So that is a very common thread that I've seen over the last 30 years. If you go to a pond, say, that is protected or doesn't have a feeder stream, it's just fed on the groundwater flow and doesn't have a stream coming in. And when you stock those ponds, they don't get the fishing's easier to fix. The pond is easier to manage because they don't have a bunch of different species of fish coming in there and messing with you. They stay bass, bluegill, red ear, whatever you stock, they stay that way. Now the bass might get a little crowded, but you can fix that and you can harvest them down and fix it. Whereas you get into a catch 22 with crappie and green sunfish, and the catch 22 is people want to. Okay, so you think I just told you the first example. You can harvest your bass, you can thin the bass population down, and the remaining bass begin to grow. Right. Well, you take that over to a pond with competing species, and it's different. Now you have another predator. So as you're removing bass from the population, the crappie are also removing bass from the population in the form of fry. They're eating the fry up. So the adult fish that you're removing, it's making it even tougher on the bass population because the adult bass population is lowering as you're harvesting fish. And means each, the bass spawn's getting even lower and it's being consumed at the same rate as the crappie. So you're reducing your bass population. You're actually assisting the crappie reduce your bass population. So you're in a catch 22 that you can't fix because you usually can't keep enough crappie to make any difference. And the lakes that are like 10, 12, 15 acres, maybe somewhere in there, if you get like real good fishing pressure on them, 10, 12, 15 boats all in the spring, and all the crappie come out, in those types of situations, you can manage the crappie spawn. But once you get 50, 60, 80 acres and you get a stunted crappie population, I've never seen anybody be able to harvest enough crappie down to change that. So in those ponds, that's where I'll go to adding like 8-inch bass, 10-inch bass, or if I had like a stunted bass pond, I've done that before as well. I had it was in Swanee, one of the first lakes I ever managed. It was about 35 acres, and it was exactly what I described just now. It had crappie in it. It was hard to catch a small bass in there. If you caught a bass, it was probably north of 4 or 5 pounds. And they were in good shape because there was also gizzard shad in that lake. So gizzard shad are good forage for big bass. So sometimes every like once or twice a year you would go out there and have a good day fishing, but usually it was a slow day fishing. You could do pretty good crappie fishing, but most of them weren't edible. And so what I did was I knew a couple things. I had a couple of hints on what was going on in that lake. And the first thing, I've never seen this before. It's the only lake I've ever seen it on. I went out there for the first electrofishing survey, and as soon as I touched the pedal, like normally I'll just tap the pedal on the floor completes the circuit. So if you fall out of the boat, it cuts the boat off and doesn't kill you. I went out there, and as soon as I touched the pedal on the shock box, I saw waking fish just under the surface, literally all over 30, 40 acres of water. They were they just cut under the surface. They were going everywhere. They were big gizzard shad. And the lake was full of big gizzard shad. There was no medium gizzard shad. There was no small gizzard shad. Every gizzard shad, actually, I've got an old picture of it. If you guys seen that picture of the gizzard shad I've put out, it's been a while now, probably a year or two ago, but they're probably 14, 15 inches long, all of them. So gizzard shad actually, they've evolved to when they take over a fishery like that, they stop spawning. They release a pheromone that stops the reproduction. They can kind of sense when there's too many of them, and they shut down. So I felt like since the lake had never been managed and I didn't see any form of shad reproduction at all, didn't see schools of small fish at all, I figured that pheromone had been released. And I figured since there was gizzard shad and there was crappie, probably what happened was there was also red ear, there was also red breast. I don't think I ever saw any green suns in there, but there was a lot of different fish species. Anyway, I figured since the shad were stunted and the crappie had probably worn the bass population down to where there was, just not very many bass. Like I said, the bass that I caught, gizzard shad will get 18 inches, man. All of them, yeah. Like big, 2-3 pounds a piece. Big shad. That's what makes them such good forage for big bass. But to finish that idea before we start answering questions, I figured the shad had shut down reproduction, and it was like, I think they live about 5 years. So I figured they were all about the same age. They had all stunted out probably about the same time. And I figured there would probably be like just a natural decline in the shad, like a boom bust type system. They go up, they go down, just naturally when they get stunted like that. So the other thing that I had was hundreds of acres of water that was bass heavy. So I had an unlimited supply of 1 pound bass for free. So I took 5 bass per acre and put them and brought, and I'm talking about 1 pounders, 5 1 pound bass per acre, not fry, and put them into that lake. And my idea was that if the shad population did drop enough just through natural mortality, that they would begin to spawn again. But they would, in turn, if the bass population wasn't there to handle it, they would also stunt again. So I started putting bass in there to bring the predators up. And I also told the fishermen, and I really don't think they harvested enough crappie, but I did get a few guys having a few crappie fries. So I got some crappie harvest out of there. And sure enough, it took a couple of years. It wasn't a fast turnaround, but the the shad did begin to spawn again, and the bass did control their numbers, and they didn't stun out again. And I was lucky. I managed that lake for about 14 years. So I got to shock that one, 14 times every season. Sometimes I did it twice, just out of my own curiosity. But I was able to kind of recover, some kind of decent fishing and decent fish growth by doing that. But at the same time, it was nowhere near, because what ended up happening about year 13, and that was right as that lake got drained. It was a Corps of Engineers lake, and that lake got drained. And it wasn't that lake that needed the dam repair. That lake actually drained into a lake behind it that was 17 acres, and that was the lake that needed the dam repair. But since they were draining the middle lake, they just drained them both and restocked them both. Just did the whole thing at once. I think they did some dredging or something in the upper lake. So that then 35-acre lake became a new lake and had great new lake effect. And it became a wonderful fishery for many years after that, after it was restocked. No, but comparing the two, comparing what I did the first time to correct it compared to the new lake effect lake was no comparison at all. The new lake effect lake just blew it away. All right, let's go back and check out some questions. Frank's writing in. Can an incoming stream keep O2 levels high enough to prevent a fish kill? It's fading on me. From dying vegetation or algae blooms? The simple answer to that, Frank, is no. It cannot. When you have a fish kill, you've created a situation where it's called biological oxygen demand, BOD. Your BOD is high in the summertime when oxygen levels are low naturally, just due to physics. The warmer the water, the lower the oxygen. So when that system is consuming oxygen at night, that little trickle of water coming in won't do anything. It's not nearly enough to keep up with the demand. And I guess I didn't really learn that until I just saw it, in the field working. And once they flip, they die, and it doesn't matter what you do. You're not stopping it. Your fountain, your $5,000, $10,000 aerator thing's not stopping it. Nothing's stopping it. There's nothing you can do. It's kind of just how it is. Now, the one thing you can do, I would say, is if there's a way that you can keep that BOD from getting there, if there's some way to limit the phosphorus, or if you were over fertilizing, or you were making some kind of management mistake, if there's something that you could do to keep that down, you absolutely need to do that. Because once you flip it, like if you go out and put too much fertilizer or you overfeed your pond with pellets, it's the same thing. What goes in one end of the fish comes out the other in the form of fertilizer. If you overfeed a pond, you'll kill it, and there's nothing you can do to save it. All right, let's see. How big do gizzard shad get? Oh, 15, 16, 18 inches. Maybe 20. I don't know. They get huge, man. Over 16. Malone saying, sure. All right. Jim's got a he says, not to sidetrack the current subject. Randy B is proposing a 2-month nationwide shutdown fishing for bass during the spawn. Would you leave a comment on that? Yeah, I mean, I would ask Randy who told him that fishing during the spawn affects the spawn negatively. Show me the data that your fishing around the spawn has decreased the reproduction of bass. I've never seen it. See, the days of these guys who are just popular with no limnology or fisheries degrees, their days are coming to an end. They've just been making up whatever they want to make up for so many years, and everybody believes them. That, you know, they think they can keep doing it. That's exactly why I'm here. Now, if he has some kind of scientific study, that can prove what he says that I'm not aware of, I'll take back what I said. That's the nice thing about science. You can change your mind. But the problem with guys like that is they like to move the goalpost, right? So I'll tell them, look, man, I manage ponds and small lakes. And it's a fact in a 1-acre pond. It's a fact in a 10-acre pond. It's a fact in a 100-acre lake. But somehow, when it gets to about 10,000 acres and the lake is that big, somehow it stops becoming a fact to them. Oh, it's a bigger lake. You don't know what you're talking about. No, there's definitely some people who don't know what they're talking about, and it's not me. Right? I'm going to stand firm on the science that I learned in school, the proven science that I learned in school, and I can say very, very, very confidently that they weren't wrong. I could not disprove anything that they taught us in school. Everything that they taught us in school was dead on accurate. So, no, I don't agree with that. I, female bass. Okay. So what 2 weeks does he want to pick? Let's just pick that apart, right? Let's just take that and run with it. What 2 weeks does he want to stop the fishing? Okay, because I've managed lakes for 30 years and the spawn was never the same 2 weeks. As a matter of fact, most of the years they start spawning, they get some cool weather, they shut down. Female bass can hold their eggs for 60 days and go back to spawning if the weather cools off. So I don't even know what he's talking about. Like, is he going to wait till the water temperatures get 68 degrees and then go 2 weeks? Well, what happens if the water temperatures after those 2 weeks drop? They drop down and then they get warmer again and the bass start spawning a month later. You're going to shut it down again? You're going to keep closing the lakes down for basically no reason? I said I'd like to see some scientific research that says fishing affects bass reproduction. Never seen it. Yeah, Malone, you got that right, man. These guys, they just, whatever they think, they've been making stuff up for so long that they think they can just keep doing this. And I'm here to say no. That's not how this is going to work for you guys. And what's going to happen since they decide not to listen, and not just to guys like me. I'm not the only guy who knows this stuff. There's thousands of us. There's an army of us. We're everywhere, right? They're not listening to a lot of science and a lot of people's experience, not just mine. So, what's going to happen to them as the guys with the small ponds and the lakes start, kind of listening to me, and they start to they go out into the field, they go out in the world, and they start catching some bass, and they correct their bass populations by harvest. I've been doing this too long. I know it. They'll start losing respect for those guys, and those guys will start losing their following. And it's unnecessary because all they had to do was say, "I don't know. This isn't." I can promise you No, understanding fisheries management has nothing to do with winning a bass tournament because those guys, the way they talk, they don't understand what I'm talking about. And you don't, obviously, you can be a really good tournament bass fisherman and not understand fisheries management, and that's fine. You know, I understand fisheries management pretty well, but I couldn't go win a bass tournament. You know, the opposite is also true. Crappie don't eat eggs. They eat Jim. They don't eat eggs. Um, they eat the bass fry right as they're hatched. Actually, what's going on there is they don't understand when people think about these dynamics, right? They're not thinking about the dynamics of the fish fry. They're thinking of the dynamic. They're thinking about a 4 pound bass sitting next to a crappie on a brush pile. All right, that's not the that's those aren't even the fish I'm talking about. Okay, this happens way before then. Um, Crappie born earlier or crappie spawn earlier in the spring than bass. A good 4 to 6 weeks sometimes, you know, and you know it. Like you've been in the lakes, you know when the crappie are on fire and spawning and on bed, and the bass are coming like a month later. I mean, how many times have you seen that? So what happens is crappie, billions, million, hundreds of millions, if not billions of crappie are born, and then they start eating zooplankton and they start eating all the things. That's all the food that the bass fry want to eat when they're born. So a full month before the bass are born, there's another predatory fish in there eating their food. All right, that's a problem. Now there's less food there when the bass are born. So if the crappie put off a huge spawn that year, you have a massive reduction in zooplankton, which is a massive reduction in your larval bass food that they're going to need the first couple weeks of their life, couple month or so, 2 months. I don't even know how long it is, but they need that food resource that's not available now because the crappie picked over the top of it for a month before they were even born. The secondary problem you have is those crappie that were born a month ahead are big enough to eat those bass fry. So I'm talking about fish that are like the size of your pinky fingernail eating tiny little bass. Okay? The bass are gone before they ever have a chance to live. Like, because what happens then is those crappie grow out to be a 1 or 2 inch fish, and then they get eaten by either one adult crappie or another bass. So that's how that works. And it's done all along the edges of the pond at tiny, 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 almost microscopic size fish. All right, your bass don't even get to 2 inches long when the crappie are competing with them. Go back, turn this thing on. He wants to protect them in the post spawn because they're weak. Okay, again, I say, says who? Okay, tell you what, this is small text. I cannot barely see it. Frank says he's been asking questions and reading some university papers, and it's coming together for him. You're not annoyed by it, Frank? I get a little bit annoyed by some folks sometimes. I got to admit, Frank. But in my defense, I've answered the same questions millions and millions and millions of times. And I will also say too that it's the way these guys word their questions. Um, if it's kind of worded in like in a gotcha, aha, gotcha kind of a tone, I don't really like that. Um, this is not an echo chamber for groupthink. And I don't care how many of Randy's little pro fisherman guys he has. There's thousands of them, I'm sure, and they all think the same way, I'm sure. All right, so I'll fall back on this, and I've been doing this a long, long time. All right, but let's use another example. Not not even that many years ago. I don't even know how 100, couple hundred years ago, maybe 500 years ago, 400 years ago. Everybody on this planet thought it was flat. Every single person assumed that the world was flat. Did that make it flat? Every pro bass fisherman assumes catch and release is the key to trophy bass management. Does that make it true? No, sir, it does not. And I don't care how many of them want to argue and throw their weight around and use their follower count and use the amount of money that they've won. Don't care. Still doesn't make it true. I've got scientific facts and 30 years experience. And I would say from the argument standpoint, I'm not going to like raise my voice with folks anymore. The only thing I can do is state the truth and stand by my experience, you know. And I can say that if hard work and education matters, then eventually I'll be able to break through and help the fisheries. These guys just don't understand the trickle down effect of what they're doing, you know. Even if they're right, even if catch and release is really good in the lakes that they're fishing in these you know thousands of acre lakes or whatever, these big reservoirs. Still, the misinformation that they're giving about managing those lakes, or I'm sorry, the information they're giving about managing those lakes, even if it's correct, is still misinformation in a pond. And they can't differentiate between the two things. And neither can anybody else because those guys didn't put that out there. So I would say the tournament bass fishermen have been the number one contributor to ruining trophy bass in the United States. They have failed big time, big time. They shouldn't talk about managing lakes. It's not their expertise. All right, Malone's coming in with 75 acre lake, tons of gizads, some gills, some crappie, bass all size. Could it produce a record bass? Sure, man, sure could, because you've stepped into the realm of 75 acres of water is getting into pretty big water, you know. Most 75 acre lakes are like public type areas. There's not too many private ones that are like that. There's maybe some neighborhood associations or whatever, but there's still be, you know, a lot of access to lakes like that. And well, that's a good point too to make. You know, I've been around lakes for a long time and done a lot of electrofishing work, and I've never, not one time, gone there and said, "Hey, you guys are keeping out too many fish. You need to ease up on the harvest." Never. Now, the recommendations I normally make are you guys need to harvest more fish. That was like every report. It got to be like a form letter. This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And the answer is harvest, 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 not release, release, release. All right, Frank's coming in here. Don't know if it's always been this way. Just didn't know until everybody started sharing thought, belief, theory. Oh, it's always been this way, Frank. Yeah. Um, I mean, I've had people on this page. There's not really any original ideas. You know what I mean? Like the guys that come on and get triggered on my page, I've had the exact same conversations in the '90s, right? And that's what I mean by when I maybe get a little frustrated, that it's because I've been answering the same questions over and over and over again, and and they think they really got you, you know. And the situation that they're in is they really from their they're so far behind and don't have an idea what they're talking about. They always ask the same questions. So I've been asked all this stuff a million times. It's like I've got every single response canned right here, just waiting. It's like sitting on a 3.5 inch tee, and I'm going to smash it with a driver. And they don't, they don't learn, man. I think that's the biggest problem I've seen. Um, and what gives me hope is the follower count next to my name. People, and that's sad. That's really sad to me that going to college and working in the field for 30 years doesn't matter. What matters is the social status next to my name, which is exactly how those guys have done all this, have spread all this misinformation. They had high social status, so everybody automatically assumed they knew what they were talking about. So now the guy, he's still going on YouTube ranting about spawning bass and all that crap. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And people believe it. A lot more people are listening to him, believing him than are listening to my truth. And I don't know how to combat that. Those guys are just going to have to die, I think, because they're not going to listen. Like I think there's a distinct reason why there's 16,600 people on Instagram and 3,300 on Facebook. Can you see the correlation there? The age correlation? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. That saying is true. Yeah. Frank, when you hear somebody say I'm willing to, but this is my stance now, Frank saying I'm willing to hear that I'm wrong. Yeah, that is a rare individual. Most people, most guys aren't even that open-minded towards it. Malone's coming in. Would a 3 fish limit for tournaments with 200 plus boats instead of a 5 fish limit make a difference? Well, Malone, what we're getting at here, let's say we had a 10-acre pond that it was crowded with bass that needed some harvest, right? We wanted to, as you reduce the bass, it's kind of like stocking the lake. You're reducing the hunting pressure. So on your big lakes, like Rodman, like right here behind my house, it's 10,000 acres. And the biologist asked me the last time I got stopped for the creel survey, have you kept any bass under 16 inches? You can keep up to 5 bass a day here, and 4 of them have to be under 16 inches, and they let you keep 1 over 16 inches. So if you know how to interpret that slot limit sign, all right, they're telling you at the boat ramp, we have a few too many smaller bass. You guys should keep them. That's exactly what that sign says, all right? But they're not writing out a sign explaining it like me. They're just saying, keep the small ones. So that guy asked me point blank, how many bass under 16 inches have I kept? And I'm guilty too. I threw them all back. Now, in my defense, I haven't caught enough to make any difference at all. But that's the problem. Those guys can pass all the laws they want. If nobody follows the law and throws the fish back, it's not going to fix the fishery. And that's exactly the same thing I've witnessed in my like 30, 20 acre, 10 acre ponds. Guys pay me $1,500 to go out and electrofish the pond. I go out, pull my survey. All your bass are underweight. All your bass are stunted. Let's pull some bass down and see what happens. And you need to take 20 pounds of bass per acre per year. So that's 21-pound bass per acre. So in a 10-acre pond, you've got 200 1-pound bass to keep out in 12 months to do anything to the fish population at all. I would say that in major reservoirs that need harvest, what they need to do to be serious about removing enough fish would be have a tournament that only the 1 to 2 pound fish count, and you can bring in as many as you can catch, and you throw none back. And we need to run tournament after tournament after tournament like that to make any difference in those bigger lakes. Okay, because the bass aren't being harvested. Even though there's a sign right there that tells you, go look at the live wells. How many guys do you see pulling fish out of there? And if you don't take 10 to 20 pounds of bass per acre out, you haven't changed, you haven't done anything. And that's what I see the most of. There's just not enough harvest to do anything to the fish population to change it at all. Yeah, it's a good point, Jim. Are all your bass dying? Bass are extremely tough, man. Like that's just all a bunch of I don't even know like again, it's some guy and I've watched them do it. And that's why I don't watch their fishing shows. That's why I don't fish in their tournaments. they don't have any respect for me and my experience, and I reciprocate that for them. Um, I can't sit there and listen to that. I just can't. So I don't. I come on here and I give my 2 cents. Hopefully it'll make a difference one day. But right now, guys like that, talking like that, they're doing a lot more harm than good. A lot more. And that's the problem too. He's become a pretty famous influencer. So there's a lot of kids who are following him, listening to him, and being misinformed. That's not how lake management works. And you know, that's the reason why I went to school. It's what I studied. You know, this is not my opinion. My opinion, before I went to college and before I did all this, was very much like his. Why wouldn't it be? It's all you see on TV. It's the only place people are getting any information from. So, yeah, I would think that too. But it's just a group think echo chamber over there. They like hearing their own voices, and they like sound trying to sound smart, and they're not. I'm not smart. Like if these sometimes people call me a genius, man, and I'm like, dude, I barely got through that school. Like my colleagues are so much smarter than me. Like if this had to do with intelligence, actual IQ, like I studied and actual real intelligence, there wouldn't none of those guys be famous. They don't even know how far behind they are. They don't even have a concept. But that's a great point. Do you see a lot of dead fish in the live wells? Oh, Big Malone comes with how often should a lake or can a lake be shocked? And by shocked, he means sampled for electrofishing. Electrofishing doesn't hurt the fish. You can kill them with it, but it depends on whether you set the box on AC current or DC current. Even though you set the box onto DC current, the box has a rectifier which pulses that current. It's a fast pulse too. It's like 60 pulses per second, I think, 30 or 60 anyway. Um, so that pulsing, kind of the on and off. If you hit it, if you take the if you cl- I think if you click it over to AC, it takes that rectifier off, and you hit them with more direct current. It can bust their heart and kill them. But by leaving it on the right setting, it's safe for the fish. And it works exactly the same way as a taser works for a cop. You ever see the videos where the dudes like they you lose control of your muscles when you get hit with electricity, right? Your muscles expand and contract involuntarily, and that's why you get those funny videos of people, people's muscles like bodies twitching and everything. The exact same thing happens to fish. So some of them just float right up to the top. Some of them just kind of turn on the edge of the brush, and you can see them down there deep, and it gets tough to catch them because of the refraction of the water, like the pencil. You put the pencil and you can't see. So the deeper fish are harder to get because of that refraction. Some float right up. Some swim right through the field. But how it works is that you have a generator on the boat that generates electricity. The electrofishing box I told you with the rectifier and the power adjustment and everything, that works pretty much like a welder. It looks like a welding box too. It has a positive and a negative side, wires that come out the back. And the negative wire goes, if you're on an aluminum boat, the negative wire goes to the boat. So you're sitting on the ground. That keeps you safe. And the positive wires go out and hang down into the water in front of the boat, 12 or 15 feet on poles. And you have kind of a system to hold that array out there, so it stays up out of the water and just hangs the wires down in the water. And that's the positive side. So when you complete the circuit, because you have a kill switch in the boat you stand on, if you fall out of the boat, your foot comes off that switch and it kills it before you hit the water and you die because it'll kill you if you hit the water. I'm talking, 15, 2,000 watts pouring 3 amps. It'll light you up. You want no part of that. But the main field on an electrofishing boat is between those wires and the boat. And in clear lakes, you can see it as you're moving. If you stay on the current and you just move the boat on slow idle speed forward, a bulk of the 95% of the fish, more than that, probably more like 99% of the fish get away. Okay, and you can see them running from it. You can just see schools of fish just running from it. It's the ones that make a mistake and run into that higher field between the boat and the array. They get stunted in there. But that's another misconception that people have. They think you're going to bring that electrofishing boat and sample every fish and like, oh, I want to see if I have an 8-pounder in here. Well, that's not going to tell you if you have an 8-pounder in here. It's a real good way to go out and catch an 8-pounder, no doubt. But that doesn't mean you're going to look at every bass you've got in the lake. You're actually really lucky to see 1% of the fish in the entire lake, no matter how big it is. Like, it's got to get down to like an acre before you start seeing more than 1% of the fish in the pond. It's just a sampling method. And that's why you don't see me using one on my pay. You couldn't pay me to get back on an electrofishing boat. There's not enough money. I'm so sick of those things. The same results every single time. I've done that so much that it's just the shine is worn off that chrome for me. I'm not doing that anymore. And in ponds and small lakes, you don't have to. And most people like who are trying to do it on their own, and the guys that are following me, they don't have electrofishing boat, and they probably don't have electrofishing boat money. And the good news is you don't need it. If you catch your fish, like I said, if you start a list and keep it in your pocket or in your tackle box, and you just take the length and the weight, that's all I need. Just accurately take the length and the weight for the whole season. Every fish you catch, that's a data set, just the exact same as the shocking boat. Now, it's a little bit biased in that it's only the fish that you caught with hook and line. There are bass, and I mean, this has been proven, there are bass you'll never catch, especially if they're Florida bass. Their genetics are even trickier. I think just based on my experience, Florida bass are way harder to catch. They're just more sensitive to the environment. And I don't know if you want to call it smarter. I don't know what you want. I don't know write the adjective. The Florida bass, in my experience, like if you stock pure Floridas in a pond, your catch rates are low. And we've seen that in Sugar Hill Outdoors because we've had the northern bass have been caught 4, 5, 6 times, and some of the Florida bass, and I mean by some, I mean like 30 or 40% of them haven't even been caught yet. So there's that. There's a lot of variables there that change things. All right. So back to Big Malone's question. I don't see any more on there. We'll continue on with the electrofishing discussion. Electrofishing is a good way to get, like, say you went out and caught, 50 bass in the season. All right, well, now you have a 50 bass data set that took you the whole season to collect. I can go collect that in one electrofishing survey. Okay, so what would take a fisherman a season to collect will take me a day or a night, an evening to collect. So that's the difference. But if that same fisherman then goes and collects those 50 bass again next year, collects me 50 more bass, and weighs and measures them and sends me the data, what do I need to go to his house for? Why do I need to spend another, why do we have to spend? And it's kind of a dog and pony show. It kind of gets into guys' head that they have to electrofish their pond every season. And when I was in business, if you wanted me to electrofish your pond, I'm going to go get that money. I'm going to run the data set. But I think the difference between me and most other people is I would tell them exactly what I just told you right then. I don't need to do this again. You can budget that money in another place. If they still decided to do it, knowing that information, then I have no problem doing that. Normally where I like to electrofish would be like the new place, someplace I've never seen before. And just to be ahead of it. If they didn't want electrofishing, if they didn't have it in their budget, then what I would do is usually, take that pond or lake and just 30 minutes or so every time I showed up and just fish and see what I could get, and take the weights and measurements that way. As long as I get the accurate data, I don't care how the fish are collected. Trap them as well. I don't know what you mean, Malone, about orange juice, man. Not following. Let me scroll back up here to make sure I didn't miss anybody's question. Hey, man, we're going on 50 minutes now? Jeez, oh, Pete. Georgia's probably already kicked off. I don't really care. If they lose that game, I don't want to watch it anyway. Dave. Dave wants to know about the biggest bass and the weirdest fish I've ever electrofished up. Well, Dave, that. All right, let me think about that for a second. I got a couple stories about that. Biggest bass was almost 15. New Lake Effect, 5-year-old. I think it was about 55 acres of water. And that was by far the biggest bass I've ever seen. Weirdest fish. Okay, so way back, 90s. I got out of school and started making contacts with different people, doing different work and working for myself. And do I remember? Yeah, it was 27 and change, I think, Frank, or Malone. Sorry about that. I think it was, yeah. So let's just touch on that for a second because it's a really good point. You're not going to get teeners under 26 inches usually. And it has to do with their frame. But a really good it takes 5 to 6 years, 7 years, you know what I mean, depending on where you're at in the world. Of course, the further north you go, the longer it gets. But length is an excellent indicator of age, right? And we can use our largemouth bass chart here. I'll show you. Like a 25-inch fish, standard weight is 9.3. Okay. So start paying attention to the 25s you see. All right, where are they at? If they're under 9.3, they're under standard weight. So it's an indicator that there's low forage for them. If they're at 9.3 or higher than 9.3, now again, I've seen 25-inch bass go 11 and a half. They can get considerably bigger than 9.3 at 25, right? But there's they kind of max out. And that extra inch, look how much an extra inch makes. It's 1 pound, right? On the standard weight, 1 pound. So if I've got a 25-inch bass, it's like at 125% relative weight, and it's at 11.3. Well, I got a 26-inch bass that should be 10.2. That's that standard weight at 26. But it's at 125% relative weight. Now it's coming up close to 13. You see how that works? So we know it takes, let's just say it takes 7 years for a bass to grow to 27 inches. 6 or 7. Let's just say 7. Okay. We now know a 27-inch bass or 26-inch bass that in that range is 7 years old. Now, how fat is it? What has it been consuming? Because I've also seen 26-inch bass that go like 7.5 pounds. Okay, so the range for a fish that length is from 7.5 pounds to 14 pounds, literally double the size. Okay, and that has to do with the balance of the population. We have the age. We know it's an old fish because it's long. You can't get a fish that long without some years. But now, how fat is it? And that is indicated in the balance of the fishery. That's telling us the available forage to that fish. I hope that makes sense. You're good, Frank, man. All right. So Malone says he's got a big fish, 24.5 with a 19.5 inch girth, no batteries in the scale. Yeah. Oops. Lost it. No scale to be 100%. Yeah, that's okay, man. I mean, that's a beautiful fish, dude. I mean, even a 24.5 inch fish, let's look at the standard weight. Okay. A 24.5 inch fish, just divide the two numbers. You got 8.1 at 24 and 9.3. So you got about a 1 pound difference, 1.2 pounds. Just take, half a pound off, go to about 8.7, 8.8 on a 24.5. That's the standard weight. So have I seen 24-inch fish go over 10? Absolutely. But they're always packed full of eggs in the spring. And they're going to drop those eggs and they're going to return back down to about 8, right? So that's where we talk about egg weight. And same thing. Say we got that 24.5 inch fish packed full of eggs, but it's only 8.5 pounds. Okay. I know then because if I sampled that fish in the springtime, I know, well, it's going to lose those eggs and it's going to fall back under 100% relative weight. And I know I'm dealing with a pond that doesn't have enough big forage for that fish to eat. I need to help that fish. I need to get some big forage in there because it's a conversion factor, right? It takes a certain amount of energy for a bass to stay alive. Then it takes a certain amount of energy for them to hunt. Like the breathing, their metabolism, all that stay alive. But then they have to expend energy to hunt. Okay. So let's just say that's X, right? It's like a letter in an algebra equation. We have X amount of energy to hunt and to stay alive to be consumed. And then let's look at the forage base. All right, what's the forage base? Is it thread fins and small bluegill? Okay, because now its average meal is probably like 0.3 pounds, right? So for that bass to consume 10 pounds, it has to eat 30 to 40 meals to get that 10 pounds or more. If the smaller the forage, the more it has to eat, the more energy it has to expend. Now let's flip that around to the gizzard shad. Now we got an 8-pound fish choking down 1-pound meals, half-pound meals, right? Every time now it has to eat 10 times to gain that 10 pounds to grow one. Okay. And that's why gizzard shad are great big bass forage, because the bass can expend the same energy to eat a half a pound bluegill, but eat 1.5 pounds shad, right? Or a pound shad. And since there's so many gizzard shad, usually those 1-pound meals become easy. So they're still spending the same X energy for hunting and for staying alive metabolism, but you've considerably raised the amount consumed per meal, right? And that's how you get big bass. So if I've got a lake that's the fish are growing good, from like all my 2-pound fish, 3s, 5s, 7, 8, 8.5, you'll see 9s coming in there, and you'll see, you're at relative weight, you're at standard weight, your relative weights are good, but you never see a 10-pound fish. Okay. That's an indicator that that X factor, there's enough forage to keep that fish at standard weight, but there's not enough forage for each of those bass to grow, to climb up to that 11-pound class. And that's a big problem you see. And the smaller the pond, the more noticeable that becomes. Michael's writing in a state with a 15-inch size limit, would it be beneficial to remove those fish? Well, I'm talking about the management of private water, where I can do what I want. I don't have state regulations. So if you have a state regulation that says, you're only allowed to harvest bass above 15 inches, you have to stay with that, right? Um, I'm certainly not telling you to break the law in public water. Now, does that mean that that law is correct? Maybe, maybe not. You know, every single place is different. And that's another problem I have with guys like Randy who want to preach catch and release all the time. Okay. There's some places where catch and release works great, but there's other places that it's kind of ruining it. And every place is different. And you have to understand how to measure it. You can't just throw these cookie cutter ideas out there. It's a simpleton, way of thinking. What it is a way of thinking somebody's thinking with absolutely zero experience. You know, it's not that simple. I wish it was that simple. My God, it would be wonderful, but it's just not. So yeah, I've seen that what I was describing before, where your bass top out. You'll be in 10 or 12 acre ponds that crank out eights. I mean, I had a 12-acre pond in McRae, Georgia. Frank, you want to go night fishing? We should. I tried going night fishing in Florida, dude. It is just a nightmare. I mean, they don't even care about bug spray. These mosquitoes are they're on another whole nother level. But I had a 12-acre pond in McRae, Georgia. A guy owned thousands of acres down there, big time developer, and it was a 12 acre. And of course, the day I got there, he's like he wants to grow the biggest bass that he can, and I'm like, okay, well, I would strongly recommend you drain it, and we just start it from scratch. Well, that was not happening. You can just take that and throw it away. Um, and I said, that's fine. You're not going to get fish as big as fast. And now, granted, it already was a pretty good pond in his defense, and he just didn't want to do that. But what I did have going for me, the property manager Hal, he was an old retired game warden. Well, he's not old, but he was a retired game warden because he got the game warden gig when he was young, and then he retired from them and got a job with this guy managing the property. And he was there all the time. He was there every day. He lived there. And Hal understood these concepts a little, So when he talked to me, he got him. He got it. It cleared him right up. And I told him straight, you guys got to go harvest the crappie, and and I'll straighten everything else. But you guys work the crappie real hard, put the feeders on, and get going. So it didn't take very long, a couple of years, and the pond really came back around nicely. And Hal told me one time, he goes, I don't fish in the pond every day. I can't. I got work to do. But every time I fish, I catch an 8 pound fish every single trip, like 22 trips in a row. And then he had a couple trips where it was super hot and the fish just weren't biting. But short of those days, every single time he got a bite, he was catching fish in that pond, he caught an eight, you know. Um, the eights to nines were ridiculous in that pond. Now we had threadfin shad, we had bluegill on feed, we did have crappie, and some other fish. We had some brown bullheads in there. We had had a stream coming in. It was in South Georgia, so I had some jacks in there, had some pickerel in there. Um, so there's a little bit of everything in there, but at the same time, it wasn't so far out of balance. And with the heavy fishing pressure on the crappie, we were able to maintain a good population. But I was never able to bust 10 pounds. And we even stocked some rainbows in there a few years, and the rainbows got that from like 8 to 9. We were kind of topped out around 8, 8.5, and then we started to get some 9, 9.5 after we put the trout in there for the winter. But I also noticed when we put the trout in there for the winter, it really did a number on the threadfin shad population over the winter. Those trout were predatory on them, so we ended up having to restock the threadies, and I've seen that happen a couple times. So I tell anybody who puts trout in there who have threadfin shad, they're probably going to need a load of shad in the spring. All right. the 75-acre lake that Big Malone fishes, absolutely no bass are to be kept of any size. $2,500 fine. Wow, interesting. They're definitely probably having some competing species problem in there, Frank. They set that unique. I bet there's big fish in there, though, right? It's a low bass population, which means it'll be big fish. And all this goes away again. Turn it back on. Yep, Big Malone says absolutely big fish. So again, they're telling you at the ramp what's going on. All right. They say don't keep a bass out of this thing or you get fined $2,500. All right. Well, that's telling me there's not very many bass in the lake. Don't keep them. We barely have enough. And Frank, that would be an excellent lake for what I recommended or what I did, on that 35-acre lake that was low like that, adding a few what we call advanced fish, 6 to 8 inch bass from the hatchery are considered advanced. They're bigger, they're not little bitty fry. They're too big for crappie to mess with, and they're big enough, fast enough that they should get away. Bass really aren't safe from one another. Like over 16 inches, your bass are safe. But in a situation like that, I would definitely do some eights, and if I could get some 1 pounders, that'd be great. But a few more bass per acre will help because when you get down that low, the bass become incredibly well fed and incredibly hard to catch. That reminds me of a 250-acre lake that used to be near my house in Georgia. And to give you an example, I made 20 trips over there. They're out of the kayak. I was paddling, but still, it was close to my house, so I just stopped there at the night. If I had a couple hours, I just paddle out. Fish a few hours, maybe 3, 4, if I had a good day. 2 hours minimum usually at least. But I had in that lake 20 trips in a row, zeros, not even a bite, right? And then the 21st trip, I landed a 9.5 pounder. So that is a perfect example of a lake like you're describing. When you see that, you're going to have to do work, right? And you're going to, as long as I think it's important to understand that you're going to have to go out there and do that kind of effort and expect no bites and know in your head, hey, I'm really not doing anything wrong. This is just how this works in these extremely low bass populations. But I like extremely low bass populations, especially in 70 acres of water, because there's going to be absolute unit bass, which is what I'm going after. I don't care about catching a limit. I'm not in a tournament. Plus, I've caught so many 1 pounders, I'm just tired of them. You guys planning fishing trips on there? Awesome. 11 people. Holy cow. You guys have any questions, man? Make sure I haven't missed anything. I have got to get some readers. My eyes are terrible. All right, so Big Malone says, I just described the lake. Fish it 14 days straight and didn't catch a fish, right? And then you can start lighting up the 7s and 8s all over 3. Yep, 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 yep. So what you'll notice in a smaller, like again, we can use our small ponds as kind of, give us an idea how fish population dynamics work. Um, as your bass population gets over 16 inches, when you get a significant number of fish, and honestly, I don't even know what that number is, but when you can go catch a fish, and it could be 16 or 18 inches, or it could be under, right? But you'll at least get a few of them, right? Those fish that are north of 16 are really good at eating bass under 10, and they do. So when you're stunted, when your pond is stunted, you've got too many bass under 16 inches and you've got nothing to control them. So when you begin to harvest those bass out, excuse me, what you're doing is reducing the hunting pressure on the forage base, and you're getting more forage surviving because of that harvest. So you're essentially restocking the pond is what you're doing, right, without paying any money. Don't try to stock. This is how you do this. Don't try to stock forage from a truck when you're in, when I've seen that. I've seen a lot of guys waste their money. Most of them waste their money because they try to stock that forage back with, and you can't. The bass will eat it so fast. But by removing the bass, removing those 1 pound bass, taking the hunting pressure down, all right, now you're getting a considerably more reproduction, living a longer period of time in the lake. And that's what harvest does. A 10 bass per acre or so, around, as long as we're talking about 1 pounders, because I don't want to catch fish over, I don't want to be keeping fish over 16 inches. Those are my good ones. Why keep them if you're trying to grow bigger fish? So that's the key, is to get your bass population, a significant portion of them, a percentage of them anyway, over 16. And when you see that, guess what happens? You don't have to harvest as many bass anymore. They're doing it for you. Double check these questions. All right, Frank's coming through with a question. Ponds with over 30% grass are problematic because the vegetation consuming nutrients. But do I remember you saying that it also provides too much cover for the forage that it also exists? Yes, Frank, you do. You're very, very good, Frank. You're listening. What's up, Hoax Life, man? So, it's okay, bro. Everybody messes my name up. Just like we talked about today, Frank, it depends on the weed as to how it affects the fishery, right? So if you have 30% coverage of one weed and another weed, it has different effects on the fish population. But it also, when we start talking about that, it's exactly the same thing as we were talking about with the crappie. We're talking about at a fry level, not really at an adult bass level, although the adult bass are what control the bass fry. So normally what you get in a weedy pond is a stunted pond with bass, because the bass, they can trap, they can hunt in all those little pockets, and they can eat up everything that's born. And I'm talking bass this big, 3 inchers. And they're in there, they've been born, and they're in that edge area where all the weeds are, and the larger bass can't get in there to them. So they're kind of behaving on the forage base the way the crappie are behaving on them. All right, you've got them confined in an area, and they're there too long. In a normal pond that doesn't have that many weeds, they would have been eaten and gone, because millions and millions of bass are born. It's like 5 or 10,000 eggs per pound. So like an 8-pound bass lays a massive amount of eggs, right? Like 40,000 or 80,000, somewhere in there. One fish, right? Well, 80,000 bass in a 2-acre pond, and when you consider all the fish are laying eggs, way more bass are born than can be supported. But that's because of like how they are. They like instinctively, they kind of know the other bass are going to eat them up, so they better have as many as they can. And that's what that weed problem does. It prevents those other bass from getting in, feeding on them, and keeping the balance correct. And here's what happens every single time. The neighborhood lets the weed problem get bad, terribly bad, for a couple of years, and lets that happen, and lets a bunch of bass get stunted. And that's how the lake gets stunted with bass, because they let the weed problem go for a couple years. Well, after a year or two of people just complaining to the homeowners president that the lake looks like crap, they call me. And I go out and treat the weeds and make the lake look pretty again. And then it's stunted with bass. And all the guys are like, well, the bass fishing sucks now, man. There's just a bunch of little fish in there. There's nothing going on. And your weed control thing screwed the lake up. No, it didn't. You guys not managing the lake property and allowing it to grow over for 24 or 36 months is what screwed the lake up. All right, now you're blaming me for clearing the weed problem out. And that's exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the misinformation around aquatic weed control. All right. And I have played that record. You could just put that like a skip on a record, doop doop over and over again. Yeah, that's my life right there with weed control. I just summarized it. All right, let me run through these comments. I think you guys are mostly talking amongst yourselves. What's up, everyone? 11 folks. That's great, man. I hope it's good information for you guys. I hope it helps you catch more fish. Sure do appreciate you listening. I think it will. I don't think understanding more about the biology of the fish hurts anyone. Past 4 years I've been doing this, I've never gotten a comment where it's like, "Wow, I learned a lot about fish biology that I didn't know, and it didn't help me at all." That's that's never been said to me ever. I think it's important to understand the fish biology, and that's the important thing too. Is like, oh, Jim, thanks, man. I appreciate you guys a lot. It's important, like the guys, the pro guys that want to talk about this stuff. They don't understand these interactions, you know. And quite frankly, I didn't either coming out of school, not fully. Um, but you guys know what I'm talking about. I mean, you're smart enough guys, work for a living. What you do for a living, you really, on a different level. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll give you an example, and I'm not going to name any names, but I was watching a pro fisherman talk about on one of his videos. He's a very famous guy. Talking about this stuff. He had gone to a pond and he was talking about fishing in ponds. And I turned it on specifically for that reason. And it was a great video. I mean, all of his fishing tips, some of the stuff that he did, was good. I learned on it. I thought he did a good job. But he started the video out and he snagged a piece of vegetation and he held it up. And he said, "I know what this is. This is coon's tail." But right before he started to speak, he made this face. Like he made a face, okay? And the reason why he made a face is because he wasn't holding coon's tail. He was holding a branched algae called Cara. And it stinks like garlic, or sometimes it smells like marijuana. But it has a funky odor when you take it up out of the water, and that's how you can tell. I mean, it's really the easiest way to tell it's Cara is it really smells like skunk. So when he picked it up and held it up to the camera like that and said, "I know what this is," I went and I saw him make that face. I went, and instantly in my mind, I went, "That's Cara," because this is what I do for money. He doesn't matter to him, right? It doesn't really matter if he understands that's Cara or coontail. All right. He still makes $1 million being a pro bass fisherman. He still did a great video. Okay. The difference between me and him is if I make that mistake and have to treat that weed, I just killed every fish in the lake and lost my job. Okay. That's the difference between me and him. Right? And catch a lawsuit and like you kill fish with chems, dude, you're done. Your business is done. I've never killed a fish with a chemical. If I did, I wouldn't have a business. Yeah, Big Malone, he did. He taught whoever watched that video the wrong thing. Now, again, does it really matter to us as fishermen when we go out there that it's one weed or another weed? No. Are the fish on the weeds or not? I mean, that's pretty much all we need to know. That's all they need to know. If they can identify the weed correctly or not, it doesn't even really matter. If they just know where the fish are and they know what the weeds look like roughly, that's really all they have to know. Whereas, like I said, I have to know it exactly. And another point too is like, let's say, I mean, especially with those two in particular plants, I could use diquat or I could use algicide to kill Cara because diquat kills Cara. Or diquat kills well, about 80% of everything under the water. It's basically like a Roundup for ponds. Diquat's also like, it used back then it was $90 a gallon. I think it's about $60 a gallon now, but I haven't bought it in a while. But back then it was about $90 or $100 a gallon. Algicide was like $20 a gallon, and that's for an expensive one. I could get it for $8 a gallon, and I could make it for $2 a gallon with copper sulfate. But I don't tell people how to do these. The treatments are the only way you make any money in pond management, and I don't give any treatment stuff away for free. But point being is, his misidentification of that would have been thousands of dollars in the treatment as well, because you're talking about treating 1 gallon per acre at $90 or 1 gallon per acre at $20. Southeast asks a question: what aquatic plant would I install? And I do not install aquatic plants. God, nature, and Mother Earth will do that for you. You will constantly be battling. Weed control is like mowing your yard. Okay. There's a couple ways you can do it. One thing that I always recommend to my Georgia folks: go to Brian at Owen and Williams in Hawkinsville, Georgia. That's where the grass carp are produced, and get you about 10 grass carp per acre and put them in your pond. Now, will grass carp solve all your weed problems? Absolutely not. And do they have drawbacks, like they're native to rivers and instinctively get into water flow, so when you get flooding, they run out of the pond? Absolutely, they do. But I like the grass carp. It's just like using goats or cows to not mow a field. You're just stocking some vegetarian fish to eat the plants. But they have a subterminal mouth, which means that mouth is kind of turned down like that. So they don't do much on surface weeds, and they don't do anything much on weeds that grow up out of the water, which are called emergent weeds. Emergent weeds are rooted on the bottom of the lake, and they grow up through the water column and out of the water, like water lily would be considered an emergent. Cattail will be considered an emergent. So on emergent weeds, grass carp really aren't very good. They're good for what's submergent weeds, weeds that grow up off the bottom but stay submerged underneath the surface. That's what they control really well. And they don't do good on filamentous algae either. So I'll put and the grass carp are in Sugar Hill Outdoors. I think I've done about 25 of them, 35 of them in there. I can't remember. So when I put my grass carp in there, I've got all that $80 a gallon, $100 a gallon, $150 a gallon chemicals. The grass carp are taking care of that for me. But I'm still going to have some algae issues pop up. But now I'm dealing with something that's $20 a gallon. So what I'll do then is stay on top of that early in the spring. You'll usually have your filamentous algae problems in the spring to early summer, right around the spawning time, and then it usually burns off. It doesn't really like super hot water, so the heat will burn the algae off. But again, I don't want filamentous algae interfering with my spawn, and trapping fish like we talked about earlier. So I'll make small spot treatments on the algae when it gets blown up into the corners, and kill it and maintain it that way. And that's what I've been doing at Sugar Hill. And to date, I think I usually use like between a pint and a quart of algicide in a little 2-gallon pump up sprayer. And I just walk around and wand it down on the surface when the filamentous algae is floating on a sunny day, so it's up and exposed. And I'm not putting that copper into the water, like treating the whole lake. I'm just treating right where the problem got blown over to the corner. So now I can just go treat that corner. So I'll start at the edge, right? And I'll work my way out. And by doing that, I won't trap fish. They'll get away from that corner, that treated corner, and they'll move away, and I won't kill them. And that's very important. How you put the chemicals down is very important. You can trap them the same way that weeds trap them. You can trap them with the chemicals, and you can have a spot kill if you don't apply correctly. But by doing that, I'm able to, how do I put it? I'm being proactive in my weed control. not reactive in my weed control, what we already described, where you let the weeds go for a year, you let it impact the fish population from getting choked out. Okay, that's a reactive. Okay, we're being proactive. We're stocking grass carp the day the lake goes in, and we're watching the weed problems every month. And yeah, maybe I'll let a weed grow here or grow there, or I'll let cattails grow here, or I'll let this go there. It's good habitat, right? But I'm also keeping a very close eye on it. Okay, and that's being a proactive lake manager. Okay, Southeast is back in here with a 22-acre lake. He's managing. He wants to introduce a feeding program. How many feeders would be sufficient? Okay, Southeast, I'll give you a couple ideas on that. I believe it's I'm trying to think, man. I think it's one feeder for every 10 acres of water. No, maybe it's one feeder for every 5 acres of water. I think it's five. So if you go by the book, it would be four. Um, Although I would say that if you had two feeding stations, if four is too many, um, definitely, at least two, because I've seen really good results with two. You're not going to do a lot with one unless it's a really expensive automatic feeder that's going off multiple times per day. The feeders have changed. The feeder technology. All right, so the information that I gave you was before we had the technology in the feeders, right? So that's why I'm saying you could probably get away with a couple instead of having four, like what the book says. You could probably get away with two. And what I do if I want multiple feeding stations like that, is I will build. I've done this many times. You put a post on the edge of the pond, and those gates. They look like that, and they have an angle like this, and then they have a straight bar like that. Just a like a Y gate that you would just put across like that. It would swing out. I'll put a cheap like $150 $200 deer feeder on one of those and swing it out over the water, and then you can get those feeders at Bass Pro Shop for deer. If it's out over the water, you can let it throw 360, and you can buy the parts, way cheaper, because the automatic fish feeders they're thousands of dollars now. Um, and if you have the budget for that, then go get the directionals that are solar charged, and I mean they got everything. But if I'm on my budget, I'm swinging deer feeders out over the water. Okay. Yeah, dude, that's a good point, Big Malone. You were listening. One place I did this, I had a yeah. That's what you got the deer feeders for. Yeah, Southeast. It's doing the same thing for thousands of dollars less, and that's why I did it that way. Um, and you could just use. I mean, you can buy 10 of those deer feeders by the time you buy one directional fish feeder. But I forgot the question that I was looking at. Hold on. Oh yeah, Big Malone. I had a guy who he had a he had a lake manage. He had a lake caretaker, and we put the feeder in the back of the John boat, and the guy was there every day, so he would drive around the lake with a trolling motor on and feed off the back of the John boat, and it didn't take very long before the fish really picked up on what was going on. And you could actually do that now. Like a lot of these trolling motors, remote control ones, you can drive, from the bank. You could do the same thing with that. You could set a feeder up on a boat or a yak and just drive it, you know, with your remote around the lake to the different areas, and let the feeder kick on and feed your fish that way. That'd be one way to have one feeder that would feed a whole 22-acre lake. Would work good. Um, I could see like was that the old town? It's got that little short trolling motor on it. Man, I could turn that thing into a portable feeding station that would be money. Just, I bet you could probably program the trolling motor to drive a certain track, every day. Just turn it on and let it go by itself. But you would need one expensive directional feeder on your boat to throw to feed that way. But it works, and you don't even need feeders as long as if you live there, just go throw the fish food in every day, a couple spots, a couple 2-3 spots on 20 acres. If you've got people living there that that would do that for you, that'll alleviate a feeder as well. I've done that many times in neighborhoods where they didn't want the feeder for aesthetic reasons, or like around here, like what are you going to put a deer feeder on the side of your pond for? Because the bears are going to rip it open and tear it apart anyway. So you have those kind of issues, all kind of crazy stuff. Coons get in and tear them up all the time. Yeah, wildlife will jack them up. So, there's options there. If you have any other problems, just let me know. Try to help you out. Again, over 30 years of experience, so I've seen about everything. That's an interesting point too, though. I've seen about everything, and I still learn something new every day. You know, it's crazy. It's crazy. 91 minutes. Well, I think I'm going to switch off and go watch Georgia. Hopefully they're winning. You guys see the score of that game? Yeah, Frank uses slingshots. There you go. I'm going to hang tight for another minute or so to make sure no more questions are coming through. And again, I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me and talking all the positive engagement. And I hope it helps your fishing. I don't have ego when it comes to fishing. I have a different perspective on that. As a lake manager, uh, if you hired me to grow fish, it's not important if I can catch them. It's important if you catch them. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. You know, I don't. I've been fishing with guys before, man. Like we're on the same boat, fishing the same bank. I'm usually fishing the back of the boat. I usually when I'm fishing with somebody, I let them have the front, and maybe I catch like a 8 or 9 or something, a good fish, and then like the dude on the front of the boat gets so mad that it's like awkward the rest of the day because he's so pissed off that he'd catch the big fish. You know this kind of cat. You know this dude. You ever fish with a guy like that? Uh, so then the whole day is like awkwardly quiet because the dude on the front of the boat's just on fucking tilt. You know, he's just pissed off, and I don't know, man. I don't like. And you act like that on my boat, and that's the last time you're fishing with me. I think that's a dumb way to be. But I don't really draw. I mean, I get as much enjoyment as my followers catching a nice fish as I do catching a nice fish. And for me, actually, I get more enjoyment growing an 8 pound bass than I do catching an 8 pound bass. Um, I mean, it's my thing, you know, I like it. Saw a few other things come through here. Let's see. 14-7 Georgia. Jeez, we're not looking so great this year, but we're winning, so that's all right. That's another thing I hate. Going to watch Debo? Yeah, man. Let's switch off so you guys can go see Debo. Again, thank you for everything, guys, and I'll see you next week.